Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
We are diving into a case that is, it's a decades-long cold case that started with a missing 13-year-old girl.
In a really quiet part of Colorado, the Black Forest.
Exactly. But this story, it didn't just end when her remains were found.
Yeah.
It completely exploded into a national investigation.
Centered on a really terrifying claim.
A claim of 48 victims across 9 different states.
All confessed, allegedly, by a man who was, for years, America's most prolific and, almost entirely unknown serial killer.
It's just an astounding number.
The immense burden of a case like this, an unsolved case, it just paralyzes communities. It paralyzes the families.
Absolutely.
So our deep dive today, it's not just a chronology of a crime. It's really a forensic look at the relentless pursuit of justice.
We're going to trace the specific investigative decisions, the systematic reevaluation of old evidence.
And the crucial role that critical thinking and, a willingness to look past the standard operating procedures.
Sharon checked 92 different databases.
92. That willingness played a huge part in cracking what seemed, for all intents and purposes, unsolvable.
So our mission is to understand how one single piece of evidence, just a fingerprint, connected a known career criminal living, literally right next door, to the violent abduction of a child.
We are tracing the investigation that led to Robert Brown.
And it all begins in the autumn of 1991, in that sprawling, quiet, Black Forest area of El Paso County, Colorado.
We're focusing on 13-year-old Heather Church and the routine night that turned into, well, an unimaginable nightmare for her and her family.
That area, the Black Forest, it really evokes a certain kind of safety, doesn't it?
It does. It's wooded, it's spacious, it's rural. It's the kind of place where you feel like your kids are buffered from the threats of the outside world.
Right. You let your guard down a little bit.
And that sense of peace is precisely what made Heather's disappearance so jarring and, frankly, terrifying for everyone who lived there.
So let's really focus on the last known moments. It's September 22nd, 1991, a dark autumn evening.
A Sunday night.
Yeah, a typical Sunday night. Heather, she's the oldest child. She's at home with her 5-year-old brother.
And their mother, Diane Church, she was out with the 2 younger children at a scout meeting. It was, totally routine.
And that routine was punctuated by a phone call.
Around 8 p.m., Diane just calls to check in, like so many parents do when they step out.
And Heather answered.
She did. She was watching TV with her brother, and the instructions were really specific. Diane said, 1 show and then straight to bed.
The conversation ends with a really casual, "Have a nice evening, love you."
And that was the last time Diane or anyone ever spoke to Heather.
So about 90 minutes later, around 9:30 p.m., Diane and the younger boys get home.
The 5-year-old had already fallen asleep in the car.
So Diane goes in to check on Heather, expecting, to find her in bed, asleep.
And that's when it starts, that immediate, just sickening feeling of dread.
Her bed was empty.
Just empty. No note, no sign of a struggle, just a missing child.
The response from the parents, Diane and Mike Church, was, it was completely instinctual.
It was immediate. They raced out of the house. Mike jumps in the truck, turns on the lights, starts driving through the property, just shouting her name.
They searched the fields for about 20 minutes, right? Convinced she must have just, wandered outside or gone to a neighbor's.
But the silence that met their shouts was just deafening.
They realized pretty quickly this wasn't some simple misunderstanding.
They were starting what Mike later called an unimaginable nightmare.
And when the police arrived, the initial investigation was immediately hampered.
Yeah, by a very common and utterly devastating assumption in these cases.
The runaway theory.
Exactly. Because you have a seemingly normal 13-year-old girl who's just gone from her home, the police initially speculated she might have left on her own.
And that assumption, which happens in a shocking number of these cases with teenagers, it leads to a critical delay.
A huge delay in treating the home as a full-blown crime scene.
Which means those precious hours right after the abduction, when forensic evidence is at its most pristine, they were just lost.
Right. Resources were being sent to check bus stations and friends' houses instead of combing the immediate area.
And because of that delay, the family made an entirely understandable but
catastrophic mistake.
Yeah, a catastrophic mistake when it comes to evidence preservation.
So when the search and rescue teams arrive at dawn, they find no trace of Heather. Nothing.
And Diane Church, just overcome with this paralyzing helplessness, decides she has to do something. Anything.
So she grabs a vacuum cleaner. She starts cleaning the house.
Oh, no.
Yeah. She was physically stopped by the sheriff, who had to rush out and warn her, stop, you might be destroying critical evidence.
So her home was absolutely a crime scene.
And that realization that her very attempt to, normalize the situation was erasing clues. That must have been a whole secondary trauma in itself.
But the house, despite that initial cleaning attempt, it still gave them their first piece of concrete evidence.
The piece that definitively eliminated the runaway theory.
Diane pointed out to the investigators that the window in Heather's bedroom looked, and this is her quote, a little weird.
And that observation was the moment the case just completely shifted. It went from a mystery to a violent crime.
So investigators look at the window, and they confirm the screen had been removed.
And then clumsily replaced. Crucially, it was replaced incorrectly.
Which points to an entry done quickly, probably in the dark, by someone who was determined to get inside.
That small detail confirms forced entry.
So someone didn't just walk out of that house.
Yeah. Someone violent had forced their way in and abducted her.
So forensic teams descend on the scene, and they are able to lift latent fingerprints from that window screen and the frame.
This was it. The first and ultimately the only piece of physical evidence they had.
But when they ran these prints through the standard system, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation database,
Nothing.
no match. So they have the killer's signature, but they have no name.
For the next 2 years, this case just becomes a highly publicized national tragedy.
Hundreds of leads poured in.
Hundreds and hundreds. Every possible sighting in malls, on buses, restaurants, all over the state.
But they were all dead ends, just consuming massive investigative resources and leading nowhere.
The sheer number of false leads just turned the whole thing into a paralyzing maze.
And that lack of resolution, the fact that a girl could be taken from the safety of her bed by a total ghost. It hung over El Paso County like a dense fog.
That agonizing uncertainty, it finally ended 2 years after she disappeared.
But the closure was absolutely devastating.
Yes. In the summer of 1993, a state trooper was following up on a report from a local homeless person on Rampart Range Road.
Which is a rugged area high above Colorado Springs.
And during that search, they found a human skull.
Dental records quickly confirmed the tragic outcome. The remains belonged to Heather Church.
And the medical examiner determined the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, so her violent fate was confirmed.
But here's the really cruel twist of fate that happens so often in these cases.
Right. Locating the body, it provides the family with closure about what happened, but it offered absolutely no new clues about the killer.
Nothing. They were right back where they started.
4 years earlier, with a single unidentifiable fingerprint, and a killer who remained an absolute ghost, hidden in plain sight.
This is where we transition from, a tragic and really frustrating mystery to what is basically a masterclass in strategic cold case investigation.
Right. So by 1995, 4 years after the crime, the investigation gets new life. There's a changing of the guard in El Paso County.
A newly elected sheriff, John Anderson, makes solving the Heather Church case his primary non-negotiable goal.
He publicly committed to the family. He told them this case will be solved.
And to make sure that happened, he brought in a true professional.
He brought in Captain Lewis Smith, his former homicide partner, as the captain of detectives. And Smith had this well-deserved reputation, nationally even.
For what?
For his investigative prowess, his bulldog tenacity, and his willingness to just ignore conventional limitations.
So his immediate focus wasn't on, re-interviewing old witnesses or following up on stale sightings.
No, he went straight to that single piece of physical evidence that had failed to yield a result.
The latent fingerprint from Heather's window screen.
We established that the initial investigators, they checked the state system in Colorado and came up empty.
And to be fair, in the early 90s, that's often where the search would just end.
Exactly. The assumption was, if the killer is not in our state database, he's either undocumented or his prints have just never been taken.
And that assumption is the failure point in so many of these cold cases.
But Captain Smith was not someone who accepted limitations. And here's where the true deep dive really begins. It required pushing against, bureaucratic inertia and all these technological silos.
So Smith recognized that the failure wasn't necessarily the evidence itself.
It was the scope of the search.
Okay, so let's unpack this crucial pivot point. This is where it gets really interesting, and you can see where the system itself just failed to connect the dots.
Smith asked a really provocative and honestly necessary question. He asked, how many automated fingerprint identification systems, AFIs, exist across all of North America.
And we should probably define AFIS really quickly.
Right. They're computerized systems that automatically match fingerprints. And in the early 90s, these systems were groundbreaking, but they were almost exclusively localized.
Meaning police departments in cities, counties, states, they rarely shared their databases seamlessly.
The systems just weren't built to talk to each other.
So, if 50 states plus territories, Canada, all running their own separate proprietary databases.
Exactly. You could commit a crime in Colorado, and unless your prints were in that specific state system, you were basically invisible everywhere else.
And the answer Smith got back to his question was just astonishing.
There were 92 separate AFIS systems operating independently across the U.S. and Canada.
Just think about the bureaucratic and logistical challenge that presents.
It's immense. He wasn't just hitting a button. He was asking 92 separate jurisdictions who had no reason to trust or prioritize a cold case from some county in Colorado to take this one latent, maybe fuzzy print and manually run it through their systems.
The amount of pushback, the resistance, the sheer coordination this must have required is staggering.
He essentially launched a manual, multi-jurisdictional dragnet using a piece of evidence that everyone else had basically dismissed.
He was betting everything on the principle that if this killer was a career criminal, his fingerprints had to be logged somewhere.
He just needed to find the system that had them.
And 10 days later, it paid off, shattering the 4-year mystery.
Lou Smith called Sheriff Anderson at 1:32 a.m. on a Sunday morning.
That's the kind of call that changes everything.
And the message was simple. John, I know who killed Heather.
The fingerprint matched records in not one, but 2 states.
California and Louisiana.
And the systems identified the suspect as Robert Brown, a career criminal already known to law enforcement.
His rap sheet included convictions for burglary, auto theft, other property crimes. So this multi-state hit confirmed their suspicion that they were dealing with a transient, professional offender.
But the most shocking, the most terrifying detail of the entire investigation, it wasn't his criminal history.
No, it was his immediate proximity to the crime.
When investigators looked into where Brown was living the night of the murder, they did not have to look far at all.
Robert Brown lived only a half-mile from the church house.
A half-mile.
He was living in a small trailer community just across the prairie. You could literally stand outside Brown's residence, look across the fields, and see the church driveway where Diane's car was parked.
He wasn't some random drifter passing through. He was, for all intents and purposes, Heather's next-door neighbor.
The reality that the monster they had been searching for, the man responsible for all this pain, had been living quietly right alongside the family he traumatized for 4 years.
That is a truly, truly chilling realization.
So once Brown was identified and his proximity was established, the surveillance began immediately.
And the detectives were highly strategic about it.
Very. They knew they were dealing with a professional criminal, a burglar, and given the gravity of a murder charge, they suspected he might have weapons or he might try to destroy evidence if they confronted him at his home.
So they needed to separate him from the trailer. They waited for their moment.
And that moment came when Brown drove to downtown Colorado Springs. He was followed to a local art supply store.
As he exited the store, detectives swarmed him,
arresting him immediately for the murder of Heather Church.
The interrogation that followed was crucial, and Brown's immediate reaction just told them everything they needed to know.
The detectives laid it all out for him. The details of the crime, the year, the location.
And Brown immediately launched into this emphatic denial. He insisted he had absolutely no connection to the Church family, to their property.
Right. He said, never. No, I can't think of any reason why I would have been there.
And that lie was so critical.
It was, because then the detectives dropped the bomb.
The physical evidence. They told him they had his latent fingerprint from the house.
And Brown just scoffs. He displays that classic arrogance of a long-term criminal who thinks he knows the system better than the police.
He tried to discredit it, right? Claiming it must have been a similar print or...
He said, I don't think you have my fingerprints. I mean, that's not possible.
But that denial served a really strategic purpose for the prosecution.
A huge one. If Brown had said, oh yeah, I was doing some yard work for the neighbor, or I helped them move a box once, the defense could have argued for an innocent explanation for the print.
But by so vehemently denying any reason to have ever been on the property,
the fingerprint placed him not just at the scene, but specifically at the point of forced entry, the disturbed window screen for the violent abduction.
The lie made the evidence airtight.
While Brown was being interrogated, investigators were executing a search warrant on his trailer.
And what they found really confirmed he was living a double life.
They recovered numerous illegal weapons, stacks of pornographic videos, and a really significant haul of stolen property.
And the stolen goods were the crucial link.
A lot of that property was quickly traced back to burglaries in the surrounding Black Forest area, so it confirmed Brown was an active, systematic local criminal.
He was casing his neighbors, robbing them, probably studying the routines of families, just like the churches.
But the search, while confirming he was a professional burglar, it didn't offer a clear smoking gun. There was no specific physical evidence directly linking him to the murder of Heather Church.
So to build a complete profile for the trial, and to really understand the violent nature of this man, the detectives knew they had to dig deep into his past.
Right, far beyond his petty property crimes. So a detective traveled to Coshada, Louisiana, Brown's hometown.
And his roots there was surprisingly respectable.
I mean, on the surface, yes. The findings from Louisiana painted this horrifying Jekyll and Hyde profile. Brown was the youngest of 9 children, and his family was deeply rooted in law enforcement.
His father was a deputy sheriff.
And his brother was a state trooper, yet his adult life was defined by just extreme, explosive brutality and pathological control.
And we have to spend some time here, because the domestic violence in his past is just crucial to understanding the potential scale of his external violence.
Absolutely. He had been married 5 times, often very briefly. And his ex-wives, they all painted a consistent, terrifying picture.
They described systematic, uncontrollable violence.
Triggered by the absolute slightest provocation. One ex-wife recounted an instance where Brown became enraged and hit her simply because she had forgotten to put a spoon in a gravy dish.
That detail. It sounds almost mundane, but it highlights the pathological need for control and the razor-thin trigger he possessed.
And another anecdote is even more chilling. It speaks directly to his volatility and this possible suicidal ideation that was intertwined with his violence.
This is the gun incident.
Yes. One ex-wife recalled him holding a gun to her head. He pulled the trigger.
It misfired.
A weapon misfire saved her life. And immediately after, in this twisted psychological manipulation, he asked her to kill him.
This is the profile of a man who doesn't just lose his temper.
No, he exists in a state of continuous, barely repressed fury. He demands absolute subservience and control over everyone closest to him.
And the ex-wives universally described being subjected to pure terror.
It confirmed they were dealing with a highly volatile and dangerous man whose violence was deeply ingrained. It was systematic.
And that violence was not confined to his home.
Not at all. Detectives connecting the dots back in Coshada found 2 unsolved cases near Brown's residence that suddenly clicked into focus.
First, there was the disappearance of Tammy Dumar, a 27-year-old waitress.
She had vanished without a trace from the neighborhood and was never found.
And second, and even more disturbing given his proximity, was the murder of Brand Lynn,
a 21-year-old woman who lived right next door to him. She had been found murdered in her own bed, stabbed dozens of times with a screwdriver.
And that case had also been unsolved for years.
So when you connect the history of extreme domestic violence, the proximity to these 2 chilling unsolved cases in Louisiana, and the violent abduction and murder of Heather Church in Colorado,
It confirmed the investigators' worst fears.
they hadn't just caught a common burglar who escalated to murder. They had caught a highly violent, systematic predator.
A potentially prolific serial killer who had spent years hiding in plain sight.
The arrest and identification of Robert Brown, it brought an immediate, if obviously painful, relief to Heather's family.
Just knowing the person responsible was finally behind bars.
But the next step, securing a final conviction, that was legally complex.
Right. Despite the overwhelming circumstantial evidence,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's a twice-convicted felon, lived half a mile away. His fingerprint is on the window screen.
The prosecution still faced a massive strategic challenge in pursuing the death penalty.
Convictions in old cases, especially those relying on latent prints without an eyewitness or DNA, they're always risky. The appeals process is long and arduous.
And the risk here was twofold. You have the chance of a hung jury, or worse, a reversal on appeal that could lead to a retrial, or even Brown's eventual release.
So the defense, knowing the strength of the evidence but also the risk in a capital case, they offered a plea deal.
Brown would plead guilty to the murder of Heather Dawn Church, ensuring guaranteed life imprisonment.
But only if the prosecution took the death penalty off the table.
And this created an intense ethical and strategic debate.
On one hand, the crime absolutely warranted the ultimate penalty. On the other, you have the promise of Guaranteed irreversible imprisonment.
The ultimate deciding factor, as it should be, came from the victim's family.
Heather's parents were not supporters of the death penalty.
They went to the prosecution and urged them to accept the deal. They prioritized guaranteed immediate closure and a life sentence over a potentially long, agonizing trial that might ultimately fail on appeal.
Their trauma had already lasted 4 years. They just wanted it to end.
The prosecution agreed. Robert Brown pleaded guilty to the murder of Heather Dawn Church and was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole.
And for the Church family, the nightmare was finally over. It provided a critical measure of closure.
But for Sheriff Anderson and Captain Smith, the job was far from finished.
They had one conviction, but the profile they developed suggested Brown was a predator of much larger scope.
Anderson was intensely worried that if that single conviction were ever overturned on appeal, this man could walk free and immediately kill again.
Just as the ex-wives had feared for years.
They needed insurance. A second conviction, based on a totally separate crime, was essential to guarantee Brown would never be released.
Which led to the formation of this elite and really unusual multidisciplinary cold case team.
A unit focused solely on investigating Brown's other potential crimes. And it was unique because it wasn't just traditional law enforcement.
Right. It combined diverse, high-level expertise.
Yeah.
You had Lou Smith, the recently retired homicide investigator who cracked the initial case.
Scott Fisher, a recently retired newspaper publisher known for his ability to synthesize massive amounts of information.
And crucially, Charlie Hess, a former FBI and CIA agent.
And Hess specialized in profiling and communication, specifically designed to get inside the mind of a high-control subject like Robert Brown.
Their mission was twofold. First, confirm the actual scale of his violence to provide closure to potentially dozens of other families.
And second, secure that ironclad second conviction.
And that's when the true scale of the horror really began to emerge.
It started in the form of these cryptic claims sent from Brown's prison cell.
The team began meticulously reviewing Brown's prison correspondence, focusing on letters he had sent to the district attorney's office.
And it seemed like Brown was playing this high-stakes game of bragging and confession through these dark hints.
The first hint was chilling. It was a piece of dark poetry referencing hidden bodies in a swampy area, clearly indicating crimes committed in his home state of Louisiana.
It read, 7 sacred virgins buried side by side under the cool, caressing swamp. The lesser worthy are scattered far and wide.
And he signed it, adding this chilling note of familiarity. Lovingly, Robert Brown.
This was the first concrete sign that investigators might be dealing with a far more prolific killer than they had ever imagined.
But then came the truly shocking, almost unbelievable claim in a later letter sent directly to the cold case team.
Brown included a crudely drawn map showing a network of states California, Colorado, Louisiana, and others with numbers written across them.
And he suggested a score.
Stating bluntly, the score could be 9.48.
48 victims in 9 states.
If that claim were even partially true, Robert Brown would instantly rank among the most prolific serial killers in U.S. history.
And the team had to grapple with this immediately. Was this the genuine confession of a mass murderer?
Or was this just the pathological boasting of a man seeking control and attention from behind bars?
That was the central question that guided the entire next phase of their investigation.
The investigators knew they couldn't just dismiss the number 48.
Right, they recognized that serial killers often inflate their counts for ego.
But they also knew that Brown had demonstrated a systematic, violent nature across state lines, so they had to engage directly. They had to play the killer's game.
They had to get inside his head to separate the boast from the verifiable truth.
And this is where Charlie Hess, the former CIA agent, was just instrumental.
He applied advanced behavioral science to the investigation.
Hess specialized in building rapport with high-value, resistant targets. So he began corresponding with Brown, treating him not like a monster, but, as the team described it, like a long-lost friend.
He wrote about mundane things, right?
Yeah.
Focusing on Brown's interests, boosting his ego, just normalizing the connection.
And it worked. Brown started dropping small, verifiable clues, almost like he was taking the team on a hypothetical death tour.
He started mentioning specific cases that the investigators recognized.
For instance, he mentioned a woman killed outside Flatonia, Texas, and he referenced specific tools, an ice pick and ether.
And that matched the details of a real unsolved case.
Right. He also mentioned a body in parts in Louisiana again, matching a documented case of a dismembered woman. He even confessed specifically to the murder of his neighbor, Bran Lynn.
The woman stabbed with a screwdriver in Coshada.
Exactly. But the immediate problem was turning these confessions into prosecutable cases.
While the details aligned with known facts, many of these bodies were never found, or the confessions just lack the specific forensic proof needed for a slam-dunk conviction decades later.
They needed a case that had physical evidence or unique internal knowledge only the killer could possess. They needed that guaranteed second conviction.
So the team fixated on one specific riddle tied to Colorado Springs, which Brown repeatedly referenced with this bizarre fascination.
The Grand M lady.
The clues were cryptic but specific enough to be actionable. Brown referenced a white Grand M and gave them a time frame, December or January 1987 or 1988.
And then he added this strange, almost clinical detail. The medical department is very efficient.
So the investigators were relentless. They spent months searching police files in Colorado Springs for a missing person linked to a stolen white Grand Am from that specific 2-month period.
And they were just banging their heads against the wall. Every search yielded nothing. The case simply didn't exist in the missing persons data they were accessing.
The breakthrough came from focusing not on the missing person, but on the stolen property, the car itself.
A detective began meticulously cross-referencing VIN numbers of all stolen cars from that time frame, and he noticed one VIN that didn't fit the normal numerical sequence. It was an anomaly that had been miscategorized or filed incorrectly years ago.
By tracing that anomalous VIN, they were able to identify the original owner who was living way out in Florida.
So the detective makes the call. He asks the simple mechanical question, "Did you ever have a white Grand Am stolen in 1987? The man confirms it immediately.
And then came the devastating follow-up.
"Did you ever have a wife or girlfriend who vanished around the same time?"
And the man just immediately broke down crying over the phone.
They had their victim. The Grand M lady was no longer a riddle. She was a real person.
A 15-year-old Latina mother married to a soldier stationed at Fort Carson.
She had been preparing for a divorce, and her husband had taken their baby out of state to stay with family. She vanished after she was supposed to pick him up from the airport when he flew home to try and reconcile.
And this detail is profoundly tragic. Her husband gets back to their apartment and finds it in chaos. The television's missing, the white Grand Am is gone.
And because he was the estranged spouse and had taken the child out of state, police immediately considered him the prime suspect.
That cloud of suspicion just devastated his life for nearly 2 decades.
And the key here is the systemic failure. The case was filed under stolen vehicle possible domestic violence and was never cross-referenced into the general missing persons files the cold case team was initially searching.
So with the victim identified, Charlie Hess and Scott Fisher requested a face-to-face meeting with Brown in prison.
They confirmed in stark detail that they knew the identity of the Grand M lady.
And Brown, who was momentarily intimidated, but mostly motivated by his own pathological desire to control the narrative, was ready to talk.
He started by confirming the initial interaction. He said the victim had come into the store where he worked, flirted with him, said she was getting divorced.
He described meeting her, going to the movies, and then returning to his apartment where they had sex.
And then, without any shift in his tone, he confessed to strangling her.
And here came the specific, unique, terrifying details that proved only the killer could have known.
Brown admitted that after the murder, he just slept in the apartment with the body.
Treating the whole night as if it were perfectly normal. There was no panic, just immediate chilling normalization of this horrific act.
The next morning, he dragged her body into the bathtub and dismembered her. He methodically bagged the parts and, knowing the precise schedule of the local services, threw them into a nearby commercial dumpster.
He was specific about his confidence in this disposal method.
This is the moment they connected the earlier riddle. Brown stated that he knew the garbage truck was reliable and would empty the container the next day.
This confidence in the disposal system, the clean, efficient removal of the evidence, was his twisted reason for calling the service the efficient medical department.
It was a cold, calculated plan designed to ensure the body would never be recovered, just sunk deep into a landfill somewhere.
He then drove her white Grand Am around for several days, using it like it was his own, before parking it strategically near the apartment building where he knew her husband would eventually find it.
And here's the final chilling detail of his control. Brown was actually working behind the counter at a local supermarket when the hysterical husband came in, used the payphone, and called the police, reporting the found stolen car and the chaotic apartment.
Brown heard the entire conversation, fully aware of the chaos he had manufactured.
These specific details, the dismemberment, The use of the dumpster, the car placement, his proximity to the husband's distress call were irrefutable. They had everything they needed for the second conviction.
On July 27, 2006, Robert Brown pleaded guilty to the murder of the Grand M lady, ensuring he would never be released.
This second airtight conviction secured his lifetime imprisonment beyond any shadow of a doubt, and the immediate aftermath was profoundly emotional.
The victim's husband, finally and officially exonerated after 18 years of suspicion, reunited outside the courtroom with his daughter.
His daughter, who had grown up believing her father might have been responsible for her mother's death.
That moment of relief, of affirmation, of restored dignity. It was a powerful testament to the cold case team's relentless effort to turn these cryptic claims into actionable justice.
The investigation into Robert Brown was, it was a decade-long saga. It provided painful closure to two families, but it also exposed the terrifying true scale of his potential rampage.
Right. While the convictions in the two Colorado cases secured his lifetime lockup, the true extent of his evil may never be fully known.
Brown eventually provided information related to 22 or 23 murders before he just stopped communicating entirely.
This information led investigators to locations all across the country.
But many of the cases he confessed to, like the 7 sacred virgins buried side by side, remain open and under investigation to this day. His confessions often served his own ego, making it hard to sift truth from boast.
But the verifiable details paint a horrific picture of a true monster.
What stands out most about Robert Brown isn't just the number of victims, but his utter detachment from his actions.
He never showed a shred of emotion. No sadness, no remorse for the lives he took. He was purely self-serving, right up until the very end.
His final chilling words to Charlie Hess, the former CIA agent who had spent years communicating with him like a friend, were a horrifying guarantee of his innate violence.
He said, "Let me out of prison, and I will kill somebody within 2 weeks."
It was a final confirmation that his violence wasn't situational, it was intrinsic to his identity.
We started this deep dive with the question of how a case that defied logic and went cold for 4 years was ultimately solved. And the answer? It wasn't a lucky break.
It was relentless effort, cross-disciplinary collaboration, and the tenacity of Captain Lewis Smith, who was willing to push beyond the status quo and check those 92 databases.
It took an extraordinary, non-standard effort to connect a known felon, a local professional burglar whose prints were on file in California and Louisiana, to a child's abduction in Colorado, even though he lived just a half-mile away.
And this raises a really important question for you to consider as you reflect on this case.
Brown was already in multiple state systems for violent crimes, yet his connection to Heather Church's murder remained hidden for 4 years simply because those 92 automated fingerprint identification systems were not broadly and immediately interconnected in the early 1990s.
Right. If those information silos had been breached earlier, if investigators didn't have to manually fight to run that print through every single jurisdiction.
How many of those 48 potential victims Brown claimed might still be alive today?
It highlights the vital necessity of constantly reviewing our technological and bureaucratic systems and ensuring that information sharing is seamless. Because sometimes the most dangerous people are hiding in plain sight, just waiting for the system to fail to connect the critical defining dots.